Welcome back to the Bob Lefsetz podcast. My guest today is Marshall Chess.
You know your daddy. I was there. I went with Chuck when he made Maybelline in Chicago. You know, it was your daddy who kept pushing for the beat, and it was your daddy who turned up the echo. Your daddy did it. And I never heard that or known that. I knew that Chess, our music, was a tremendous part of the foundation of rock and roll. I mean, that's a great legacy. I know that for a fact that that's true. But I never knew my dad was that. He was the beat and that. And no, we had a homemade echo chamber. It was in the basement. I used to have to go down there because of rats making noise, just like because it was a long sewer pipe. It was all very inventive stuff, man. The beginning of creativity, making records. We wanted these sounds, just like a lot of reggae has it. We wanted this black audience then love these unique sounds, different things, echo, beats, loud guitar. That was it made it sell more. That's a better way to tell you. And so we had this long clay sewer pipe with a cheap speaker at one end and a mic on the other. And they would send the signal down to the speaker. It would go through the mic, be picked up by the mic and sent back up. That was the echo. And then there used to be noises. And they'd say, there's rats, go down there. I had to go down. I was always get the coffee. I was the coffee boy too. That was one of my first job. I should tell you that story. So I went down there and I see all these old boxes and I open up one, a stack of 4 or 5 boxes, and it's full of 78s, Louis Armstrong on the label. I go back up to my uncle. I could never talk to my father, wouldn't have even discussed it with me. I said, Phil, what's that Louis Armstrong? He said, oh, shit, when times were hard, we had to do some shit. I guess they were bootlegs, that to pay the salary. They must have, done something. They weren't original pressings, that's for sure. But that's a true thing, man. They always wanted to change the sound and make it better. We had our own mastering. Our studio was built on springs. It was brilliant, Although like the Rolling Stones, when they came to Chicago, I set that up in 1964, because I got to know them well for 7 years. I hung out with them nightly. They would say they wanted to record a Chess. That's why I set it up. Their manager, Andrew Oldham, called me. I got the call because he had a foreign accent. That's why I had already been to England to set up Chess internationally. That was another one of my early jobs. But anyway, aside from that, my uncle said, use them. The Stones thought if they recorded at the Chess studio, they'd sound like a Chess record. Of course, that's not the truth. It's the playing. Yeah, the studio is something. And actually, they wrote and pre-produced Satisfaction. And then they finished the recording in L.A. on that tour in 1964. But that was my first experience with them and seeing those English groups when they came to Chicago. But okay, so the studio.
Let's go back.
Go back.
Okay, so your father's making these different records. How does he go into rock?
Blues records? Blues records.
And how does he go into rock? And is Chuck Berry the first person he cuts, or what?
I got it. I got it. Ready? Here we go. Chuck Berry wanted to be a blues singer, and he came up to Chicago with his wife, Janita. No, his wife. That's Muddy's wife. He came to Chicago with his wife. I don't forget what her name is. He came to Chicago with his wife. They went to hear Muddy Waters. He was a giant Muddy Waters fan in a club. And after the gig, he went to Muddy. He says, look, I made a tape. What do I do to get on a record? He says, go see Leonard Chess tomorrow morning. Tell him Muddy Waters sang. And that's exactly what he did. And he went, he waked in the morning. He said, Muddy Waters told me to see you, Mr. Chess. My dad went in and played the tape. And it was 2 sides. It was a cut named Ida Red and one called Wee Wee Hours. Wee Wee Hours was a straight 12-bar blues like Muddy Waters would sing. Wee Wee Hours was a unique, different sound, which perked my father up. It was called Ida Red. My father said, I don't like the title, and I'm not sure about the lyric, but the way it sounds, the guitar, the beat, you got something different there. let's make a deal, but go and rewrite the song. And there happened to be one of the girls there had lipstick or makeup called Maybelline Cosmetics. There was a company called Maybelline. You probably remember that.
Of course.
And they called Maybelline. And he was back within 2 weeks. And it had written Maybelline, called it Maybelline. They recorded it. And that was in 1955. And he went, so all the road trips were done by car. No planes. We didn't have the money. It was a small company. It was a blues company. He was on the road. He started in New York and he was going to work his way back to Chicago. At that time, the king of radio in New York was a disc jockey named Alan Freed. Everyone knew about Alan Freed. And it was also the time of massive payola. You know, the independent record business would never have even developed without payola. I mean, payola is what allowed anyone to make a record and check it out. You put it on the radio, see if the phone rang, if people wanted to buy it. So anyway, my dad goes and plays Alan Freed, Maybelline. Alan Freed hears it. It's something special and different. He coined the word rock and roll. That was all part of the Chuck Berry. Alan Klein, instead of giving him money, he became the writer of Maybelline. He went on as writer. That was his. And that night, and my dad got in his car to drive back to Cleveland, right? A one-day drive. Alan played Maybelline nonstop. 3 hours, over and over. Broke the record. My dad got to Cleveland. He calls my uncle in Chicago, because they didn't have cell phones then or anything, or internet. He calls my uncle. He says, "What's up? What the fuck is going on? It's going crazy here. The phone rings every 2 seconds. This Alan Freed, Maybelline, it broke. We got a hit. Leonard, we got a hit." And of course, he rushed back to Chicago and began to spread it. By then, we had independent distributors. You know, all the indie labels. There was a whole group of independent distributors all across the country. It's so funny when I hear that Kanye West bullshit, anti-Semitic. Everyone I knew there was all Jewish names. I could give you a list of 30, you know, there were all these Jewish guys like my father and uncle, you know, who just like the early movie guys, you know, they sensed something about this music and all that. But coincidentally, in 1955, a couple months later, Bo Diddley came in, who was a Chicago street artist. My uncle heard that tape again and put out Bo Diddley. So we had these two major pre-foundational rock and roll hits in 1955. And like I say, my life changed. Our whole family's life changed. And I must say the world began to change, maybe, because rock and roll changed the world. And my family had a lot to do with it. And, you know, I never realized that. Bob Krasno, you know who that was? The industry guy, you know.
Of course.
Bob once told me, he said, "Don't you know you're the first family of rock and roll?" He said, "You don't even know that." And I said, "You're right." Bob and I had taken mushrooms together. We were like, when he had Blue Thumb Records.
Right.
Bob was the one who steered me to the Rolling Stones. He wanted to join me to sign the Rolling Stones. That's how I found out that they were available. You know, they wanted them to do something. And I told Bob, I said, "After tripping with you, you know, motherfucker, we could never work together. Our egos," that was that era of, you know, our egos are way too big. I said, "Will you give me Mick Jagger's phone number?" He gave me his home phone number. That's how that all began for me, through Bob Krasno.
Okay, but let's go back. Let's go back to the blues era. Your father's cutting everybody. You mentioned
it starts with Muddy Waters, who has hits. I Feel Like Going Home. They were big hits, you know, not big. I mean, again, there was a radio station in the South, WLAC, 50,000 watts, white disc jockeys, but they played blues, black music. It would cover 13 states at night, all through the South. So, you know, we were having, like, you know, blues hits. I'd say the biggest record, 30, 40,000 would be a giant blues hit, like a million seller. But yeah, we were having hits. But Muddy Waters and all the airplay put chess on the map with every other blues artist who wanted to be on the radio, and it became a magnet. And then at the same time, we had a great deal with Sam Phillips, who eventually had Sun Records with Elvis. But before that, He was probably one of the first record producers of, white record producers of black music, along with my father at the same time. He sent us Howling Wolf, and then we had Howling Wolf. And then we had another big hit which they say is the first rock and roll record, called Rocket 88 by Jackie Brenston, and who was the saxophone player for Ike Turner's orchestra, Ike and Tina Turner. It wasn't Tina then, just Ike. And we had that hit, Rocket 88. I'll never forget the way those cars, two-tone paint. That was the big ghetto car, because it was the first with two-tone. Yeah. And Don't Be Late, Come On Baby, and my Rocket 88,
Okay, so what were those old blues guys like? And what was their magic?
You're asking me that. Everyone asked me that. Here's what they were like. Marshall, did you get any yet? Did your dick get checked out yet? No, they ever asked me. They only cared about if I ever discovered sex. I was 12, 13 years old, 14. They didn't talk about business or music with me at all. Zero. And I was, like I said, at that time I was the coffee boy. I'd have to walk to get, before we had people had coffee machines in our offices. You had to go out to get it. In that era, they had shitty cardboard cups with these horrible paper bags that would leak. They'd disintegrate. My hands would be burning, But what were they like? They were great. Muddy Waters used to call me his white grandson. His wife, Geneva, used to send me he'd bring me fried chicken. And the thickest aluminum foil then was thick, man. I can remember that. He'd bring me that, Muddy was I was the closest to Muddy. First time I met Muddy was, I always tell this story, but your audience will probably like it. I must have been, so I'm just trying to think, 12 years old. We had moved from the third floor. Blues moved us from the third floor walk up to a row house, 8136 South Yates, in the south side of Chicago. My uncle lived 2 blocks away. I'm out in the front yard with a house next to a Cadillac pulls up, and this guy comes out, and he's got the bright green, iridescent green suit with hair looked like it was a foot high. Like, who in the fuck is, as a kid, I'd be like, what is this, I had seen black people, but this was duked out. And the car, and I looked down, and his shoes blew me away. They were like pinto pony hair of the fur of a horse or cow. And he looked at me and said, "You must be young Chess. You'll pappy home." That's how I met Muddy Waters, man. And he came over to get advice, money. I don't know. I wasn't in, I don't know what went on, I was dragged around, and I never saw, I went on the road with my father, I saw he was paying people off, but I didn't know what it even was, I sort of was just, it was all a natural thing. And I always wanted to make records like my dad. I had a chance when I was 20 in 1962. I got to go to Muscle Beach in Carolina, Muscle Shoals, and recorded Bo Diddley's Beach Party on a desktop. There wasn't remote recording then. Me and the sales manager, Max Cooperstein, we co-produced it. And in the middle of that, I'll give you an example of how it was. So you want to know how it was? Bo Diddley had Chester Simmons. That was like his road manager. We recorded in the middle of the second set. Jerome Green, the maraca player, was the original guy when they played on the streets in Chicago, so they didn't have to carry a drum. It was Bo Diddley on guitar and this guy Jerome with maracas. He jumped off the stage, and all these white kids started dancing around them. 20 minutes later, cops came in with German shepherds, shut us down, and said, "You let them white kids dance with your niggas? He said, I lock you Jews up. No one will even know where to find you." That's exactly right. But we recorded enough to put out that album, and it was stopped.
Okay,
and we
so
went back to the hotel. Well,
keep going. You went back to the hotel, yeah?
Yeah, it's a good story, man. We went back to this whole beach hotel, old wood one from that era. We were planning to go early. We shared rooms in those days. One was having separate rooms, me and Max. And then the next room was a honeymoon couple. And he showed me how if you hold one of those old-time water glasses against the wall, you could hear. So I had my experience of hearing people fuck for the first time on that trip, as well as being called a dirty Jew nigger lover, Excuse my language with the N-word.
Okay, but so your life changes with Maybelline. Then what
Yeah,
happens?
Maybelline and Bo Diddley, same year.
And then what happens?
The two together
with
really
you?
did it.
And what happens with the company and what happens with you then?
The company exploded. I mean, we had money to produce more, sign more, expand more. They wanted to expand into LPs, into jazz, all that, little by little. We wanted to get into jazz. The LP was really invented and out. It started with Dave. We had this guy, Dave Usher, who was like a jazz fanatic, friend of my uncle's from Detroit. He produced stuff. Then there was a famous magazine in Chicago called Downbeat. That was the major jazz magazine. We hired the editor, Jack Tracy. Figured he knew everyone. And that's how we started. And the blues were all, believe it or not, the blues were always recorded in the daytime. But we had the empty studio at night. So Jack, we would work it out. Everyone knew they could pick out some extra cash after the gig at Chess. And that's why we put out the first Roland Kirk album, James Moody, Dorothy Ashby on jazz harp, Ahmad Jamal, Ramsey Lewis. Wow. Because it was relaxed, it was at night. A lot of it was real jazz. They just wanted the money. They made it up. It was totally improvised a lot. And one of my early jobs was Mr. Samuels. We did union sessions. You got paid for a 3-hour session. Because I got all the dirty jobs, getting coffee, going late, early in the 6 a.m. at the pressing plant. I also had to go meet Mr. Samuels, the union guy, when the checks were signed, because I had to make sure they signed the publishing and all that before they got the check. So I used to go at night. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the business. Certainly Atlantic wasn't paying royalties. What was the royalty situation at Chess?
What was it? I always got to ask that because there's such a lot of, Chess ripped off artists. The indies ripped off. Some did. And I don't believe my father ever overtly ripped off anyone because of the way he raised me. That's not even, he just was never even part of it. But there were no entertainment lawyers. That came later. We had a 1-page contract, publishing on one side, recording on the other, one piece of paper. Yeah. We had no computers. Everything was manual. Even order taking. It's so confused now with modern technology. When I worked at Chess, everyone had one of those little pads with carbon paper, and the phones would ring. 1300 St. Louis. You just yelled. You'd hand in the carbon paper. I saw my dad once. This is way after Chess. This is later, in 66, 65. I saw my dad the only time once of reviewing the royalty statements with the bookkeeper. And he would bring in this long, stacks of white paper. And the Dells, a doo-wop group, had a big hit then called Oh, What a Night. And he looked at the Dells. It was big. It was like, $18,000. Not million. And he looked at Muddy's. That was the period when blues were dead. Black people wanted Motown, R&B. We don't want our grandfather's music. And the white Jews hadn't discovered the historical ones, Anyway. And I looked at my dad. I heard my dad looked and he held up Muddy and he said to Ted, he said, take $5,000 off of the Dells and put it on Muddy. That's my last story on royalties. That was my father.
Okay, so you graduate from high school, and then what happens with you?
I go to college and I become the Chess promotion man in Denver, Colorado.
So you go to college in Denver?
Yeah. I wanted to go to UCLA or USC. I did not get accepted. I wanted the West Coast bad. I loved cars. I loved girls. I loved California. I'd been there. We had the first black record executive, Paul Gayton. Paul Gayton was from New Orleans. He was a famous New Orleans band leader, and he started out playing for the most famous Italian mafioso in a whorehouse. And then he became a big band leader, well known during that era. And my dad and him hit it off, and he became our first guy in New Orleans when we did all this Clarence Frogman Henry, Ain't Got No Home, all our Cajun kind of music. But then he moved to California with his wife, and he drove a Rolls Royce. He lived on top of the hill with Ike and Tina Turner's house, and he opened our little office, the chess office in L.A. So I wanted to work with him, but I didn't get accepted. So after 2 years at Denver, I applied to USC and got in, and I moved to Hollywood. And my dad was having an affair with the the hostess at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel.
Wait.
Managed an apartment building behind the Ground Chinese Theater that was for hookers, and we never knew that. And she got me an apartment there. It had sparkle in the ceilings, and that's where I lived. I lived behind the Chinese Theater for my first year of college at USC, and worked out with Paul Gayton in the office.
So did you graduate?
No, I didn't graduate. I never wanted to go to college. My dad didn't give a shit. He said, just go learn what you can for the business. I had a radio show at USC. I took plastic engineering to learn about record pressing, marketing. But I would have stayed, but I never did it in a proper way. I would have probably had to gone 5 or 6 years because I just took what interested me. We didn't care. He didn't really care. I didn't have a push from my mother or father about, not like a modern, the way I pushed my kids, but I didn't have the push. But then in my senior year, fourth year, second year at USC, my dad got horribly beat up. Evidently, the mafia tried to move in on Chess Records in Chicago. And he refused and got out of it with help from Morris Levy. You know who that is?
Of course.
Roulette Records. Okay. Well, Morris, anyway, they knew each other. All the indies were like part of the wild bunch, Morris knew the Chicago Mafia through his guys, but they were upset that that they couldn't get a piece of chess. And 2 guys, they called him up that there was a fire, and he went down there at night, and 2 guys, he fought them with a heart condition, and he was horribly beat up. He couldn't even go out of the house for weeks. His face was live. I came back. They called me and said he lived, but he was horribly beat up. And I said, I'm coming home. And I got in my car and I drove to Chicago and started working at Chess Records. That was it.
So that's how you dropped out of college, when your father was beaten up.
Yeah, I wanted to go home. I didn't want to go to college anyway, but I liked LA. I loved it. I loved living there. I had a house eventually in Benedict Canyon. I love working with Paul Gayton. It was a fabulous experience, working with him. Like Little Richard would come by the office, all kinds of, he was just a brilliant guy. And I learned a lot about life from him. And he was a brilliant musician. And he used to come to our house, stay at our house, play the white Jewish grand piano in the suburbs. And we'd all go around. I started playing. He got me. I was a trumpet player. That's a whole other musician story. Can I go wild?
Sure. Tell
the story.
Yeah.
So I'm a kid. I watched From Here to Eternity. You know that movie?
Of course.
Famous movie.
Of course.
And when the guy played taps with a bugle, I got emotionally moved. And I wanted to do that. And I joined the Boy Scouts and I became a bugler. I was 14, just turned 14. And my dad thought the Boy Scouts were whack. I could tell he didn't like it. He went to one thing with me there, one father and son thing. It wasn't his thing. But so I learned how to play reveille and the a few things, taps. And then I started high school. I was 14, South Shore High School in Chicago, still living on the South Side before we moved to the suburbs. And I began to take trumpet lessons. I had a Martin trumpet. I used to walk on the rail. I was just enamored. I joined the high school band. No, before, that was my 8th grade. I used to walk on the railroad tracks. I practiced. I could play Lady of Spain, I Adore You, all these. Oh, My Papa. I could make you cry, man. I could play it. I loved it. And then I went my freshman year before we moved to the suburbs, South Shore High School. I joined the band. I could read music. I learned how to read. Not like a arranger, but I could play my little parts. And I loved it. And I was at Chess Records working, and my father said, come on into the office. It's my uncle, my father, and my grandfather, Zadie. And they all said, we don't think you should become a musician. I said, what? We're in the music business. Marshall, it is the worst. They get $40 a session. You'll never be able to support a family. It's a horrible, they knew from, hiring guys. It's not a good thing. We know that you love it. We think, like it was like the mafia, that you should come in the record business. You come in the record business, that's your business. You'll be around music. You can learn how to be a producer, blah, blah, blah. And I, of course, said yes, totally. I mean, that was like the committee, I said yes. I still have a trumpet so years later, I'm on a Rolling Stones tour, 1972. It was the tour where we hired Stevie Wonder's horn section called Wonder Love. Steve Matteo on trumpet, Jim Price on trombone, Bobby Keys on saxophone. The Stones always had a couple tune-up runs, and Steve Matteo had 3 or 4 horns. So I picked up one of his trumpet. It was a trumpet. And I could still, could play an impressive riff, one riff, da-da-ba-da-ba, like a jazz riff. And they looked up like, oh my God, Marshall, ba-ba-ba, come join us. Well, every horn section wants to be fatter. It was adding another horn, I said, man, come on, you got to teach me at least the chords. And so they taught me some of the bullshit. And the first night I went on, and by the next morning, I couldn't touch my lips. They were that bruised because it takes years to develop the callus and the pressure. Yeah, I could, but I wanted to get me on stage. So it's online. I played so that before Europe, we had an English gig. That was the next gig. It was in England, Liverpool, some city, not London. I know it's online that you could see where they talk about it, and they have my name as the horn player. And I ended up convincing them that I would only come in for the last 4 songs. And that concert tour ended with Street Fighting Man. It was easy, one note. So I played 8 concerts on stage, the last 4 numbers with the Rolling Stones on the European tour. And it was a tour where this was a fabulous lifetime experience. It was a tour where the promoter had to give us a bushel basket full of rose petals. And and the horns were facing the stage. We were on the far left, and the piano was on the far right. He would start on the far right dancing towards the end, and he would throw rose petals on the piano on each player, Bill Wyman, and everyone would cheer as he, did that walk across the stage. Well, the first time he came with 30,000 people in front of the horn section, I almost peed in my pants. I never felt anything like that. The energy factor, it was unreal. It was indescribable. I can't even describe it to you. When people say, what is it? I said, the closest thing as a poet, I would say, was like a mother's love holding you. It was a warm, man, it was something special. And that concert tour, we had no encore. So everyone walked, after Street Fighting Man, I went with them. We walked into the van, and it was dead quiet. While they were still cheering, we were on our way back to the hotel. So I got that amazing experience of feeling that energy, which is why I'm sure they're still out there doing it, That is special. You get addicted to that. That is way stronger than anything I ever took. You get 30,000 people loving you, They weren't loving me. They were loving Mick. But the overflow, he's standing in front of you. Boom. That was a fantastic thing. So that was a great experience. And that was the end of my trumpet playing, even though I still have it as a souvenir against the wall in its case. My Martin trumpet. Chess Records, the foundation of rock and roll, blues, jazz, gospel, soul. See the faces that made Chess Records one of the most seminal record labels in the world, in this fabulous new chess tribute book, available on Amazon and other fine bookstores. Thanks for listening. See you at the next podcast. Come on, check out our video channel, and please subscribe.